Welcome to A Guide to Every Deck in EDH, and today I thought I would look at partners. Now this is going to be a little bit different because there's so many different combinations of partners that you could play that it would basically take forever to go through every single permutation of them, and a lot of them are also kind of just doing the same thing. So I think rather than going through every single permutation of the partners, I would rather just have a broad overview of partners, what combinations they come in, the general strategies that go on with them, and so on. So the first thing to note is that the first partners were all double colored. Now there are newly added partners that are only a single color, but what this basically means is that all partner decks are going to be at least 3 colors, if not 4 colors, and often 4 colors. And a lot of these partner decks wind up being general 3 to 4 color good stuff decks, and not necessarily in any particular strategy or theme. The next thing to note is that for most of the partners, there's at least 2 cards in any of the 2 color combinations, and usually one of the 2 cards is far and away better than the other one, so that's the one that you're going to see more often. So in this case, Kydel and Thrasios are the Simic commanders, in the Simic partners. And Thrasios is by far much better than Kydel because it's an infinite mana outlet from the command zone. Bruce Tarl and Akiri, usually Bruce Tarl is the card that is played. In Ikra versus Raihan, Ikra is usually the Golgari one. Krom versus Ludwig, Krom is played. Ravos versus Tymna, it's Tymna. In the case of Sidar, for some reason, Selesnya doesn't get 2 different commanders with partner. So if you want a Selesnya partner, it's always going to be Sidar Kondo. But Sidar Kondo sucks. He's just really bad. So you're only playing him for the colors. Same thing in Gruul. Gruul just has Tana the Bloodsower. Rakdos also only has 1 with Vile Smasher. Dimir also only has 1 with Silas Ren. And Azorius only has 1 with Ishai. So some particular notes with these commanders in specific. Thrasios is, of course, an infinite mana outlet in the command zone. So he is able to go infinite with any sort of infinite mana outlet. He can also just be a general value piece given enough mana and in combination with cards like Seedborn Muse. Also, blue and green is a great color combination. Bruce Tarl gives attackers double strike and lifelink. Again, you're usually not playing Bruce Tarl because this ability is hugely relevant, although gaining the life can sometimes be relevant. Same thing with Ikra. Ikra's ability also involves gaining life based on dealing damage. So she's usually, again, just based on the colors, although the life gain can be relevant. Krom draws cards whenever an opponent casts their second spell. Krom is card advantage from the command zone and makes fast mana, and particularly cards like Grim Monolith and Monavolt, a lot better. And Tymna is probably the single best of any of these commanders because she draws 1,000,000 cards. So Tymna is at the beginning of your post-combat main phase. You may pay X life, where X is the number of opponents that were dealt combat damage this turn. If you do, you draw X cards. So Tymna decks will very frequently play many creatures that cost 2 or less, 1 to 2 mana, often with evasion, that can attack your opponents and draw cards. And specifically what she does is she winds up turning every single 1 to 2 mana creature, especially those with evasion, into card draw engines. So cards like DRC, Ledger Shredder, Mindblade Render, the Fairy that draws cards on every second spell, cards like the one that makes Thopter tokens if you control your commander, basically all cards like Dothy Voidwalker, all creature cards that cost 1 to 2 mana, again, especially those with evasion, either become straight up playable because now they're all card draw spells, or become just better in general because they have card draw tacked onto them. As I said before, Sidar Kondo is just not good and is basically only played for the colors. Tana the Bloodsower makes 1/1s when you deal combat damage. She usually winds up in stacks decks, in particular Birthing Pod decks. Vile Smasher also isn't particularly great. Its ability is a little relevant, but it's mostly played for the colors. Silas Ren is also, the ability is not great. It's okay. Silas Ren winds up in a lot of like turbo ad nauseum decks that have a lot of fast mana. And then Ishai is, among these commanders that I've just highlighted, probably the one that sees the least play, but I don't think that's because it's the worst. I think it's because specifically white and blue as the color combination, and because its ability involves beating down opponents rather than being any sort of like card advantage or anything else from the command zone, although Ishai is good. And then the other commanders like Ravos, Ludwig, Raihan, Akiri, and Kaidel. While they can all be varying amounts of good or bad, the problem is they are just usually just worse than their counterparts in the same colors, and so they really just don't wind up seeing any play. Now, apart from those ones, we also have all of the single color commanders. Now, once you get out of the 4-color partner pairings and you just have 3-color partner pairings, because at least one of them is 1 color only, this starts to make the ability of the commander a lot more important, since you don't have the ability to have as many colors. And for these ones, the relevant partners tend to be Arden, which goes into equipment matter decks. Yoshimaru is in some decks, but really not that many. Malcolm is a whole deck built around itself, specifically its ability to combo with red partners and Glinthorn Buccaneer as a combo piece. And I will do a deck tech specifically on Malcolm decks. Sakashima, which for the most part tends to pair up with Krark, although it can pair up with other things. It's basically good for any deck where you either care about specifically a clone ability or where you want to double up on the other commander's abilities. Armix occasionally shows up in some decks as a removal spell, but it's not that great of an ability. Tevish Zot is a way to generate tokens and draw cards via sacking in black, and is probably the best black partner. That's a single color. Dargo, cost reduces itself and has the ability to sack things, so it goes into various sacrifice decks and can be part of a lot of different combos. The card I tend to see this paired up with the most is Ikra. Jeska Thrice Reborn is a pretty unique partner among partners. 1, it's a planeswalker, and 2, it has the ability to deal and divide damage along with tripling the damage of something. But the main one is the -X to deal damage. So first of all, it is actually pretty relevant to deal up to 3 damage divided around various creatures. You can pick off all sorts of mana dorks and stacks creatures with this ability. But the other part of it is that is an infinite mana outlet, because the -X can deal damage to opponents. If you can generate infinite mana, you can just -X for the maximum amount, deal X damage to an opponent, or split it up against multiple opponents, and then put it back in your command zone. And then because you have infinite mana, you just recast it, use the -X again, etc. Loop until all of your opponents are dead. So like Thrasios, it is an infinite mana outlet in the command zone that just wins on the spot. The card that I see this paired up with classically is Ishai, but it can pair up with other things as well. Kedis spreads the damage from typically the other partner onto all opponents simultaneously, which isn't too relevant of an ability, but it is relevant for certain cards. Specifically, I think it pairs up with Malcolm a lot. You've got Krark, which is usually just paired with Sakashima and goes into Izzet Spellslinger decks. Rograk is particularly relevant as a commander. For 0 mana, since you have access to a 0 mana creature at all times, it means anything that makes that relevant becomes a lot better. So cards like Mox Amber, or anything that sacks a creature for value, so things like Culling the Weak, Skull Clamp, etc. Rograk tends to go into Grixis-oriented Turbo Naz lists as a result. And then green tends to have the least relevant of any of these single color partner commanders, with Kamal and Kodama being the standouts. Kodama is essentially a Cloudstone Curio in the command zone, allowing you to bounce and replay things over and over. Or rather, not so much a Cloudstone Curio, but just like a way to cheat things into play, essentially. And Kamal is a way to turn lands into creatures, which could be relevant for certain abilities. It also kind of overruns statically on this beginning of combat trigger. But for the most part, these green commanders tend not to be that great. And then, of course, we have the 2-color pairings. So what winds up happening a lot is, again, that these just become 3 and 4 color good stuff decks a lot of the time, although you will go down certain paths like Rograk Silas, or, we'll put you down Turbo Naz. Like Tana will probably be in some sort of Blood Pod stacks deck. Tymna puts you down the path of playing a bunch of evasive 1 and 2 mana creatures to draw cards with. But outside of like those specific synergies, you get a lot of just like generic good stuff lists from partners. Now, apart from these partners that can pair with any of the other ones, there are also some other partner and partner style mechanics that are more limited in scope. So there's also the mechanic of partner with, which is basically partners that only partner with one specific other card. So the first ones here being like Regna and Krav. Regna only partners with Krav. Krav only partners with Regna. Now, for the most part, these, of course, are going to highly depend on how good either one or both of these partners are and how relevant their abilities are. So for the most part, the only ones that I really see having any play out of these specific partner combinations are Pier and Toothy. And this is mostly because Toothy gets to draw cards. You've got Halden and Paco. They do allow you to sort of cheat things and have certain infinite mana combos. There's Khazar and Ukima, which again are mostly in like food chain lists due to Okima's abilities. I occasionally see Braylon and Shabraz show up, and that is basically it. These ones tend to not be anywhere near as good as the other partners, although I would say the best ones among them are Khazar and Ukima and Paco and Halden. There's also Friends Forever. So this was introduced in the Stranger Things Secret Lair. So this is basically a variant of partner where instead of being able to pair with any partner, these can pair with any Friends Forever cards. Although most of these are not good either. The main one that I see is Othelm and Cecily, which is again another deck that I will actually make a specific deck tech on. And then lastly, there are the Doctor's Companion cards from the Doctor Who set. So these are cards that pair up with one of the Doctor Time Lord cards. These are fairly new, and I haven't seen much brewing with them so far, but I also don't really see anyone running any of these as a deck. So I'm not saying that you couldn't see any of them, but in all of the various partner style mechanics, these ones seem to be the weakest. And here's a look at the doctors just for good measure. So these are the creatures that you can pair up the Doctor Companions with. But yep, that is going to be an overview of the partner commanders and the partner style mechanics.